Hello and welcome to Just Films and That with me, Josh Hallam.
And me, Alice Oliver. This is the podcast where we talk about films that we think are underrated, underappreciated, or we just wanted to talk about them.
We're also going to get stuck into some classic films that one of us maybe hasn't seen, and maybe throw in some great guests along the way. So, we start, as ever, with a random question. Alice, have you ever broken a bone?
You know what, Josh? No, I haven't. I am a proud member of the Never Broken a Bone Club. As far as I know, anyway. I know, obviously, people say that you break your toes every now and then, like they'll just break, so that might have happened, I'm not sure, but not officially. Never required medical attention for a broken bone. Why? What about you?
Same as you, touch wood. I don't think I've ever broken a bone. I think I sprained my ankle ligaments once playing football.
Oh,
no big deal, whatever. I got the ball. It's fine.
Scored a hat trick, whatever.
Yeah, but it went in the end, and at the end of the day, 3 points, team performance. Anyway, so we'll move on to talking about this week's film. So I chose this one, and it is a classic film. It's the second one we've done. The first one was Meet Me in St. Louis, which you chose. So we're going to talk about The Great Dictator, which is from 1940. So obviously over 80 years old, but spoiler warning, if you've not seen The Great Dictator. If you've not seen a film, it's it's a parody satire on World War II and the rise of Hitler. So it mirrors real life events. So Charlie Chaplin plays both parts. He plays an unnamed Jewish barber who's injured in what's called the Great War. He then spends years recovering and is unaware that at the same time a dictator has risen to power called Adenoid Hinkle. Who might that be? He's kind of installed like a totalitarian government. He's anti-Semitic. And so once the barber comes back to the ghetto where he lives, he starts to join the rebellion against Hinkle. However, they just so happen to look exactly alike. So,
funny that, eh?
Yeah. So, So it's not set in Germany, and it's very much like it mirrors real life, but it's not set in Germany. It's set in Tomania, and there's a bordering country of Napolina. So, Alice. Classic film. Had you seen this one before?
I had not seen this one before, Josh. I'm very interested to know why you picked it.
So I picked this because I knew we'd kind of we'd broadened our horizons to talk about classic films. And this is one I'd never really got around to watching, and I'd never seen. As someone who's is very interested in comedy and stuff, the inner workings of comedy, I'd never seen any Charlie Chaplin film. And I thought this might be a good one to start with. Obviously, he's primarily known as a silent movie star and resisted the urge to move into what they called talkies or talking pictures at the time. And this was his first. I think he did dribs and bits and pieces elsewhere, but I think this is considered his first feature-length talking film. And I knew the basic plot, and I knew this famous thing. Obviously, it's been around for so long, and it's such a hugely influential film. I knew things like the Globe scene, I knew the plot, and I knew the famous speech at the end because it's been used and parodied and quoted so often. So that's why I picked it. Really, I just picked it because I wanted to pick a classic film. I've got loads and loads I want to see, but I thought I'd pick something like this first. So, what did you think it was good? Like, what did you know about it going in?
So I didn't really know much about the film itself. I, like you, hadn't really been exposed to Charlie Chaplin that much, but I did study film at university, and obviously you watch a few bits and pieces there, about the origin of cinema. So I'd seen sort of some bits and pieces of some of the silent films he'd done, but hadn't really sort of delved any further, really. But I'd heard of this film, and I knew that it was very, held in very high regard. So I was very excited, actually, when you said that we were going to watch it, because I was like, this is a great one to sort of finally get round to. And in general, I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's very, you can really tell that it's a film that is on the cusp of sort of two different huge moments in industry. So you still have the sort of silent film kind of vibes and some techniques to it, but then with the dialogue sort of added in and some sound effects here and there, not all the way through though. And some scenes would be completely silent. So it's interesting sort of trying to get that balancing act, I suppose, of, oh, we've discovered this new technology, we know how to do it now, but what is actually possible, or what is it actually that you're going for? So that was interesting. What did you think about it? Did it meet the expectations that you had of it, whether they were positive or negative expectations? Was it what you imagined it would be?
So I went into it probably thinking I'm going to go into this and be able to really appreciate why it's had such a massive influence on other films. I'm going to really be able to see, when you've seen other films and you go back and watch older films and you're like going, oh God, that's where they got that from, or this influenced that and stuff, that sort of thing. I thought that would probably where it began and end for me. So I could see why it's a masterpiece, but perhaps it might have aged poorly. And I certainly didn't actually expect to find it funny or not that funny. However, I thought it was a lot funnier than I was expecting it to be, because there's so many types of comedy in there. You've got visual gags, you've got obviously slapstick, you've got satire and parody, you've got actual written jokes. So it was really, really funny. There's two main things about this film which I really loved. The first one was Charlie Chaplin himself. I mean, I knew bits and pieces about Chaplin, having read about him, having seen the Attenborough biopic of him with Robert Downey Jr. and listened to, things about him on radio shows and stuff. But he did everything in this. He wrote, directed, produced it, scored it, obviously starred in it, played two parts, and either completely funded it or partially funded it. Now, this is at a time when America was not actually in the Second World War yet. It's about a year, 18 months off America joining the war. So this must have been a huge reputational and financial risk for Chaplin to do at the time. Now, he did say since, because the film does discuss, as we've already said, it mirrors the real life events of the persecution of the Jewish people all around Europe. Now, he did say after he did this film that had he known the atrocities of the Holocaust and the concentration camps, amongst all the other atrocities of the war, that he wouldn't have made this film. So we should say straight off the bat that he himself did say that, many years after the film came out. So, but that aside, it must have been such a huge risk for him. But I just thought, what an incredible kind of feat for someone to do. I mean, it's not an unknown thing now to have someone do all those things in a film, but at the time, he just did everything, and his performance is incredible because he plays two parts, and they're so different. He plays the kind of the Jewish barber, and all of that is very, it's much more closer to what he was known for. Like you said, it's a lot more kind of physical comedy, slapstick routines. I mean, his movement with his feet in the pan scene where, so if you've not seen it, there's a scene where two officers are trying to kind of arrest him and get him, and there's the girl in the story, Hannah, is like leaning out of a window and she keeps like donking them. It's quite hard to describe. It's such like a piece of physical comedy. Basically, three characters are all wrestling with each other, and Hannah, one of the characters, keeps donking them all on the head. But whilst he's doing it, it's just like that cartoonish thing where he gets donked on his head and he wobbles and weaves and dips and dives in his feet. I mean, I don't know. This might be an incorrect quote, but I believe someone once said Charlie Chaplin is one of the world's greatest ever ballet dancers.
Oh, interesting. I can certainly see
because
that. Yeah.
I mean, he's not young in this film. He's not old, but he is in his mid-40s or something like that when this film's made. But the physicality of what he has to do, and he was not a tall man. He was something 5'5", 5'6", something like that. So the movements he does, it's just incredible. So, and then you move on to his performance as Hinkle, as Adenoid Hinkle, and that's all in the dialogue. That's all in the parody. That's all in the satirizing of Hitler. So he does this sort of impression of Hitler where he speaks in a pseudo-German language. So it's not actual German, but he's like making it up on the spot.
There's sort of lots of just sauerkrauts and schnitzels in there, sort of just sporadically.
Yeah, which I mean, look, I'm sure there's people who say that's obviously it's based on a stereotype and it's quite offensive to people who speak German. for me at the time, knowing that he is satirizing Hitler, I think it works. I think it works. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, certainly, because you're satirizing him in it's him, it's his in his entirety. That is sort of you're using his language and his culture to satirize him, but that's completely fair when you're a dictator. You are going to get satirized.
Especially when you're an absolute monster.
Indeed.
But so he speaks this pseudo German, and like you say, he keeps just saying like he keeps saying English words, or he says like sauerkraut, or one he keeps saying is cheese and kraken. So he keeps
Oh,
saying cheese and
really?
kraken over and over. So if you hear in the back, he'll like do a big long speech that sounds German, and then it'll just finish with cheese and kraken, and it's like. I found that very funny. But also, he does stuff when he's doing Hitler's speeches. I mean, he has Hitler's movements and his art and his patterns of speech absolutely down to a T, which when he's not actually speaking German is quite the feat. But there's little jokes in it, like he speaks into a microphone, and the microphones, because he's speaking so violently and viciously, the microphones like cartoonishly bend away from him whilst he's speaking. And there's one long bit that really made me laugh where, 'cause obviously he's speaking anti-Semitically, and he does this big long speech, but all through it there's been a translator saying like his Royal Excellency said this and he said that, and then he speaks for about a minute, and then the translator just goes, he's speaking of the Jewish people, like that, and it's obviously so clear that he's just spewing this vile, horrible abuse out. But yeah, so I just thought his performance was incredible. What did you think of his performance?
Yeah, fabulous, and just so versatile, like you're saying, like in his physicality, in the way he tells jokes, in the way he creates comedy around him as well. Obviously, so many facial expressions and kind of such intensity with his physique, because you have to do that in silent cinema because that is how you communicate with the audience, isn't it? You can't use your voice. So it's brilliant that he's been able to sort of transfer those skills and for them to be just sort of as successful, I suppose, and sort of as sort of natural where they are in the talkies compared to the silent cinema. There was lots, like you were saying, sort of like little stunts really, or in kind of within the slapstick. So near the beginning, I enjoyed. There's a part where he's in the aeroplane, in the little aeroplane with is it a German soldier who or not German, sorry, so
Tomanian
soldier. Yeah. Oh, something I was wondering about that. Is that sort of a play on To Mania?
Possibly,
Like,
yeah.
where are we going? To Mania.
Yeah,
where the craziest thing on earth is literally happening.
I mean, I hadn't thought that, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's so layered. It is so layered. Like the way that they parody Nazi Germany and the way that all like the costumes and everything and the manner of speech that they take little things that we now know happened, like the salute, and they change it slightly so that everyone knows what they're doing, but it's not that. And they all have a double cross, which is obviously parodying the swastika and that sort of thing. So that's probably that right. And again, it's why the script is so good, which we'll come on to. But you're right, like Tumania, I didn't even think of that. But yeah, so anyway, so he's in the plane with the Tumanian soldier.
Yes, and obviously the plane flips upside down, and they're having, is it a pocket watch or something that's hanging from his neck, or a compass or something,
Yeah.
and that's sort of creating a lot of havoc. But you can tell that they're actually upside down, like the way his face falls. So they're actually doing that. And now, I don't know if it's just because I hate being upside down so much. Like, I get really dizzy and really sick really easily. So, like, if I spin around or whatever, if I do like a forward roll or something, I'm gone. So I don't know why I'd be doing so many forward rolls in my 30s, but you never know.
When I'm just at work and I'm doing a forward roll.
I just like to make sure I can still do one, So I was just like, oh man, they're upside down. I bet they were upside down for ages. And then obviously they flip the frame so that it looks like that they are now the right way up, but they're not. They're still hanging upside down. You can tell by the way, obviously their hair falls and their faces sort of crease into themselves. So that was interesting. And it was kind of sort of a little bit of like showing off and just kind of being like, look what we can do. We can flip this. They're upside down, but you're seeing them the right way. And I really enjoyed that because it is a great sort of opportunity to show off what you can do cinematically as well.
Like you say, they must have been experimenting with all sorts of new sort of thing, new what can we do with this technology sort of thing. I mean, I think that's like you say, the pocket watch is flying up in the air because they're upside down, or he tries to have a drink of water as well, and all the water pours out. So it's interesting you say that, and it's interesting, that's a point I'd never considered, which is around this time must be obviously the only example of film stars and actors moving from silent cinema into talking cinema and taking all that is good about uh, silent cinema into the talkies. So that's probably not something that there is a fair example of now. You might suggest, people who haven't worked with CGI work with CGI, but that's not as big a change as talking. I suppose if you look at someone now who maybe deals a lot with physicality and mime, like maybe like an Andy Serkis or a Doug Jones, maybe that's something, a slight similarity, but that's still, going from no sound to sound, that's still a drastic change compared to anything in these days. So, yeah, so I loved it. I absolutely loved his performance. And the second thing I loved, which I've already touched on, is the script, the variety of different types of comedy they used, as well as being able to see the influence this film has had. So I really enjoyed. This has influenced everything from films like, if you think of something like The Interview with Seth Rogen, very satirical, very well covered in the press that North Korea weren't happy about that. Bit similarly, that allegedly Hitler wasn't happy about this being made, or so you've got that element, the satire element, or even things like, I suppose, like Four Lions or something like that. Then you've got literal examples such as, like, I could see bits of like Airplane and The Naked Gun, like the way the script has like little throwaway gags. So for example, like the scene you were just talking about where they're flying the plane, they the pilot says to him, "Can you fly a plane?" And he just says, "I can try." And it's like that. I laughed at that. I know it's just a daft joke, but I really laughed at that. Or there's another one where um, they're watching a parade of soldiers, and you can hear like of the soldiers marching, and they kind of go, "Here come the infantry," and it's like, and then they go, "Here come the light infantry," and no sound comes, and one of them goes, "Oh, that's very light," and it's such a dad joke, but it's funny, and you can see why, things like Airplane, Surely You Can't Be Serious, Don't Call Me Shirley, that literal pun, that word play, if you like, it must have come from, well, I suppose Charlie Chaplin at the heart was a vaudevillian, wasn't he? Because that's how he got his start, and then he eventually became the biggest star in the world, and then that kind of wordplay must be where that kind of joke comes from.
I also felt like when I was watching it, it felt like bits of Monty Python. It felt like bits of Blackadder, like you were saying, and even beyond films. Like, it feels like there was a lot of influence for television shows from it, or maybe just from his style in general, as opposed to just the film. But yeah, I definitely felt everything sort of felt familiar. Like, so many things that had come after and that I'd already seen had sort of emulated it or paid homage to it. And I feel like that's sort of when you know that you're kind of onto an epic or something. Similar, like with Star Wars. I think I've said this to you before, but I had all my Star Wars education from Family Guy, from the cutaways they did, from those long episodes they did. And then when I watched Star Wars, it was like, oh yeah, like that bit. Oh yeah, like that bit. And it was kind of similar with this as well. So something I hadn't realised was that speech that he gives at the end was from that film. So I know that speech. It's been used in a few songs. I'm pretty sure Paolo Nutini used it.
Yeah, Iron
I think
Sky,
Bliss and Esso. Yeah, I think Bliss and Esso used it in one of theirs. So I knew the speech and was kind of familiar with it. But I didn't know it was in this film. And then when sort of Charlie Chaplin starts speaking, I was like, I recognise that voice. Why do I recognise that voice? I know who that is. And I was like, oh, that's the guy. Is that the same guy? Is that the guy who does the speech? And then obviously it was at the end. So that was great to be able to see that, sort of after having it on my radar through other various kind of pop culture references, and then to be able to sort of see its origin. That was pretty cool. Yeah, this is the fun of going back to these classic films, isn't it?
Yeah, like you say, these classic films they have been around so long, and they've been watched by so many people, and they have been so absorbed into the culture that it's almost unavoidable to know things. So I've never sat and watched Gone with the Wind, but obviously I know, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, and it's that sort of thing. It's like, I watched Jaws probably for the first time when I was about 18, but I knew all of the famous music and the famous lines. Same sort of thing. Around the same time, I watched Psycho, and I'd never seen that before, but I knew what was coming. And it's funny because you'd think that might lessen your enjoyer of a film because you kind of know what's coming. But the fact of the matter is, these films are so well made that it improves your watching of the film. You know, I knew that speech was coming. I did know it was from this film, but that's about all I knew. But that speech, as much as it has been used in many different ways, some ways, you know, kind of trying to trying to make points that it's not really trying to make. But I'll leave that with you to interpret yourself. But the fact of the matter is that speech is so incredibly written. It's probably one of my favorite pieces of cinematic writing because I just think it's so
Wow.
powerful. It's such a
Mhm.
powerful piece of writing. I mean, if you
Mm.
haven't seen the film, the whole, I mean, go and watch the film, but the whole speech is on YouTube. And like Alice has said, it's been used in other songs. First time I heard it used in a song was in the Paolo Nutini song "Iron Sky," in which it is clipped. It's not the whole thing's about 5 minutes, and he only uses 30 seconds or something. But it's it's a brilliantly written speech, and it's all about. So actually, something I wanted to come on to. So I thought I knew the plot of this film, and what I thought was that the whole thing about them looking alike and looking the same would actually come into play much earlier, and you would have a kind of like a not trading places, a mistaken identity type plot where perhaps both of them are stuck somewhere for the majority of the film. But in actual fact, the mistaken identity part is the last 10 minutes.
Well, I didn't think that that was going to happen because it had sort of gone on so long. We were kind of coming towards the end. It hadn't even sort of registered to me that that was going to be part of the plot as well, even though obviously it should be, because otherwise what's the point of having one guy play your two lead characters,
Exactly.
obviously.
There's a lot of commitment for what could have been could have been a sort of poorly executed payoff. But the matter of the fact is they play it so well, and Chaplin plays it so well that it is a huge payoff, even though he only swaps roles, if you like. They only have that case of mistaken identity for 10 minutes. Like I said, if you've not seen the film, so as we've said, they look alike. So at the end, the dictator kind of gets arrested because the guards are looking for the Jewish barber. The barber they think is the dictator. So he's expected to give a speech to a country they've just invaded and, if you like, taken over. So they put him in his uniform and put it on stage, and he makes a speech. They're all expecting this huge, vile, horrible, hate-filled speech. And in fact, because he is the barber, he takes that opportunity to essentially undo all the things he's done, and he gives this big speech about compassion and helping your fellow man. And it's incredible, especially because they cover topics that he says, black man, white man, Gentile, Jew, and all this, which is not the kind of addressing of race is not something you expect to see, because we know now, like we talked about with Meet Me in St. Louis, we know that obviously the way black people being treated in America at the time, the fact that he chose to say that, again, probably in a way, not that it should have been, but probably in a way was quite a risk for him to say that, to say they should be
Yeah.
treated, because segregation was still very much going on. The Jim Crow laws were still, I think, very much going on. So I just love that piece of writing. I just think it's so powerful.
I think the thing with the speech as well is that it can be interpreted in those two different ways. So you can say it to a crowd of thousands or millions of Nazis, or you could say it to people, who do want a better world and who do want, justice and equality for all. And you take from it what you want, because he's talking about, don't live in chains. We are not cattle. We are men. And obviously I call them Nazis, the two aliens. So for them, it's kind of like, yes, he's right. We must overthrow our oppressors, who, they've been led to believe are the Jewish people. But then also speaking as a Jewish barber, speaking to his community and wanting the best for his country. It's just, it's so, like, it was so indicative of just how things can be twisted and how people just discover weird meaning in things and interpret them to kind of suit themselves. Because I do know, sort of familiar with kind of a lot of what Hitler was saying. A lot of it, I believe, came from the sort of Asatru and the kind of Nordic religions, but he was kind of misinterpreting it or kind of taking it to mean what he wanted it to so that it worked with his agenda. So it was just interesting to see that. And the whole speech as well, the whole film even really, in a sort of cynical way, but also I think overall maybe positive. I don't know. But it just made me feel like nothing ever changes. Like, just nothing ever changes. Like, this is the shit that they were having to deal with back then. And now you sort of fast forward to this age, and we've still got leaders like that. I'm not saying as much in the Western world, but we know they exist. We know that countries are in these horrific turmoil where awful things are happening to marginalised people. And it's just like, nothing ever changes. We're just like stuck in this cycle.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And it's not just relevant in a political sense. So I think that I was watching this and I thought this script is more relevant and funnier than some comedies that have been made in the last 10 years. Like, it's still relevant. So like you say, there's that political argument, but also if you think about the situation we've recently been in with a massive worldwide pandemic, that idea of shared experience, shared traumatic experience like the war, creating comedy. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that the pandemic is anything near as horrible as a war. I'm just talking about a shared experience of something quite traumatic and quite hard, creating this idea of comedy. So you are right, and you are right. There is still elements of it that are very much relevant in a political landscape. Like you say, countries which are still under a dictator and that sort of thing. Did you find this film funny? Did you laugh?
I did. I definitely laughed out loud at least twice. And the whole time, like, I just felt engaged with it the whole time, and beyond the fact that I had to watch it because that's what the podcast was about. I just sat down to it and I was like, I'm going to experience something here. Because it is a little bit, it's the closest you're going to get to traveling back in time. It's the closest you're going to get to, like, connecting with people back then and how the world was. So it's both horrifying and comforting that, through decades and decades of time that you experience the same things.
Absolutely right. I'm the same. I found it. I expected to go in and probably laugh a little bit, but I laughed a lot more. Like, there were scenes when I actually laughed out loud, and not just certain types of comedy. I laughed out loud at some of the physical comedy. Like, I found the pudding scene really funny because that's like a classic comedy sort of trope.
With the coin.
Yeah, which is
with the coin. Yeah. That was very funny. That was funny.
Yeah, so it's a classic comedy trope, which is you know something which the characters don't, and because you know that, so they decide to bomb the palace, and the captain has 6 of the rebels, one of which is Charlie Chaplin's character, and some other kind of Jewish men from the ghetto where they're all living. And he says, fate will choose one of you to go and do the bombing. And what he does is put one coin in their food, their kind of like fruit puddings that they're having. And then one of the love interest character, Hannah, finds this out. So she puts a coin in all of them, and they're all eating these puddings thinking that if they get the coin, that means they're the ones going to have to go and blow the palace up, except they all get a coin. So they're all trying to hide their coins. And that's the sort of thing that if you saw that in a film now or a sitcom, you'd think it was funny, or I would anyway. And obviously I know all comedy is subjective, but I just thought that was so funny. Like, it's such a classic idea, which comes back to the idea that you're talking about, which is that, it's aged so well. It still feels so relevant.
Yeah, certainly. I would 100% agree.
So, was there anything that you kind of didn't like about the film? We always like to give a balanced argument, as you know. Was there anything you didn't like?
I don't really think so. Like, I didn't come away from it thinking, oh, I wish it had been more like this, or, oh, what was going on here? Oh, the costumes were naff or whatever. The only thing, and it was just because I found it a bit distracting, was where the moments that were completely silent. So you weren't getting any Foley sounds, you weren't getting any background noises. Like, near the beginning, the barber, when they're out on the field and it's kind of a bit of a war scene and you've got guys running around and explosions and such, and they've got like this massive sort of gun cannon thing. And there's a lot going on with that. Sort of he's hanging off it and sort of trying to swing it around. And all those moments, a lot of them were sort of completely silent. so you weren't getting sort of that smooth transition between scenes. But I mean, apart from that, because it's just a product of its time. So it was distracting, but certainly didn't ruin the film for me. Was there anything you noticed that you found a bit? Ooh.
Similar to you, it does start a little slowly because it starts with a lot of physical routines. But I think the reason for that is because it was his first big talkie. He obviously was trying to ease the audience in and be like, look, I can still do this, but I'm also going to do this at the time. So yeah, there was that. And of all the comedy in it, like silent comedy is my least favorite, but that's because I'm, the age I am and was born when I was born. I don't particularly enjoy opera and ballet, but when that was the entertainment that you had, you probably enjoyed it or you learned to enjoy it. So because there's so much more available to me, and because our kind of people nowadays are kind of a little bit spoiled for choice, I wouldn't necessarily pick a silent comedy. I'd be interested to maybe pick one for another a classic film. So I did find that a little slow in places, but to be honest, I don't really know if I can hold it against the film because it's my modern lack of an attention span, I guess, in a way. So I agree with you. There's not really much. Again, like we've already touched on, the kind of impressions of the German language, Tomanian language, as well as there's another dictator who is clearly Mussolini and is clearly from Italy. You could probably say those impressions are a little offensive, but because it's kind of sending up and kind of parody, and it's so cartoonishly a parody, it's not. I didn't find that offensive. So, no, there isn't really anything I didn't like. It's difficult. I mean, no, there was some elements. I thought it was the only thing is a bit strange when they escape from the prison and you don't actually see it. You just see a guard say they've escaped, but no. No, I think I'm clutching at straws a little bit. No, I didn't really. There wasn't anything that I can actually actively put my finger on and say I didn't like. So we'll move on to talking a little bit about the critical reception then. Now, I've picked this because it's a classic film, so we're not going to pick whether it's underrated or underappreciated. I think what we need to do is have a little look at the critical reception and decide, is it a classic? Do we think it's a classic? So, to give you a little bit of an idea, IMDb gives it 8.4 out of 10, and Rotten Tomatoes, the audience give it 95%, and the critics give it 93%. So,
wow.
What do you think? Is it deserving of its status as a classic?
Yeah, certainly I would say so. I think that when you can see so much influence elsewhere of like decades and decades of cinema and television, and it's still kind of touching things now, then yeah, certainly. I think those 90s are pretty generous, eh? There's quite some big scores there, definitely. How about you? Do you feel like it is deserving of its classic status, and do you feel satisfied, like you got from it what you wanted?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say it any other way. I think it is a classic. I think that I actually would say the IMDb score of 8.4 is a little low. I would say I think it's absolutely a classic. I thought it was brilliant. I definitely watch it again. I really enjoyed, like we said, its legacy improved the film. And I liked the elements of satire and parody and all the different types of comedy, and like you said, enjoying the influence it's had. So yeah, I think it is firmly deserving of its classic status. So there we go, another classic film, which we've decided is very much deserving of its classic status. So I'm sure Charlie Chaplin's can rest easy, knowing that we've decided that The Great Dictator is worthy of its classic status. Alice,
it's what you've been waiting for all this century.
If he was a ghost in Casper, he would go to the afterlife now because of his unfinished business.
Exactly. He's crossing over. He is done.
So, Alice, it's your turn to pick next week. What are we watching?
So, Josh, we're going to go for our first listener suggestion. So this is from Sam, and he thinks we should watch Drop Dead Fred.
Drop Dead Fred. Interesting.
Ooh,
well,
indeed.
Okay. Tune in next week for our first listener suggestion, which will be Drop Dead Fred. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us, please do drop us an email. It's filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're at films_that on Twitter, and the Facebook and Instagram is filmsandthatpod. See you next week for Drop Dead Fred. Alice, thanks very much for joining me as always.
Thank you so much, Josh. Always a pleasure.
It's goodbye from me. Cheerio.
Bye.